Hi, welcome to my podcast on ideology and the political spectrum. This is not a super long podcast, but it's very important nonetheless, because in order to understand the linear spectrum that we have in the United States, we need to understand what ideology is and what, in general, the political spectrum could look like for people all over the world. So a very important definition is ideology. And ideology is a set of beliefs and values and ideas that guide individuals and groups of people. And it is what pushes us to make certain decisions and that affect society. And it's based on our belief system. This set of stories and ideas that we perceive to be true. And we get our belief system often from religion, but we get our belief systems from a lot of the influences around us, like our family and where we grew up. And those help to define our morals, our idea of what's right and what's wrong. And so people's ideologies differ very much depending on their belief system and the morals that they have. Ideology is super important because it really affects society, because it helps people to figure out why things are how they are. And it also helps people to figure out how things should be in the future. And so that's kind of our ideology, encompasses all of our ideas that we have about how society should be organized. However, there's not one correct ideology and then many incorrect ideologies. People have different values. People grow up differently, and people see the world from all sorts of perspectives. And so we have to remember that when we are engaging in political conversation, because our perspectives are based on our backgrounds, and our backgrounds differ. So it's really important to just keep that in mind when talking to people with different ideologies. Now we're going to look at the political spectrum, not one that's specific to the United States, but one that encompasses a little bit more than what our political parties look like in our country. I'm therefore introducing you to the political compass. And the political compass is a better indicator than the linear spectrum, because that just has two sides to show ideology, because it has a social scale and an economic scale. And so it really can show you that there are people who believe in really a lot of control over your personal and social life, but very little control of the economy, and vice versa. And so there are four quadrants that people's ideologies fall into. This slide shows where different famous people throughout history were on the scale. And so you have Hitler, who most people know about, and he was a dictator, and he controlled everything about people's lives in terms of who they could marry, because he didn't like people who didn't fit his idea of the perfect individual. And he didn't let people vote for their leaders. He stayed in power. And so he was a dictator. But Stalin, you can see, was also like that, but he also cared more about the controlling the economy as well. And so that's why he's more to the left. And then you have somebody like Gandhi, who's the total opposite in terms of social and personal freedom. He wanted people to have independence, the Indian people to declare independence from Britain. But yet he still believed in government control over the economy so that there would be social programs that helped people, even if they had personal liberties and freedom. Then on the right, you have Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister of Britain back in the day, and she believed more, just like Milton Friedman, who was an economist, in lack of economic control in the economy. And that's because it was the idea that if you just let the economy be, people can gain wealth. Besides for people in history, there are also politicians who are put onto this scale. On this slide, you have the 2020 presidential primary candidates, and you can see the Democrats especially are all over the place in terms of their ideologies. They tend still to advocate for a little bit less government involvement and more social control, but definitely more government involvement and less social control than Republicans. You can see Joe Biden's kind of in the middle of the pack. But if we look at the 2020 presidential candidates when they're just running against each other, we see that Biden has moved a little bit. He has moved a little bit more towards the middle, towards Trump just a little bit, because as opposed to in the primaries where he was courting only Democrats, now he's trying to move to the middle to appeal to a broader range of people. Different types of governments tend to fall in different places on the political spectrum. And as you saw from the 2020 presidential primary candidates, in a democracy, people really fall all over the place. And that's because there's so many different ideas and ideologies that people have, and they're allowed to have them, and they're allowed to run for office. But we see in a dictatorship, they're going to be more towards that top, the authoritarian place. And in communist societies that want to control the economy, they'll just be a little more to the left. But other dictators may be to the left or to the right, just depending on their economic goals. But a monarchy, an absolute monarchy, is going to be up there as well. Anarchy, on the other hand, would be all the way to the bottom right, having no economic control and no control over social and personal life. And so, as you can see, this really helps to differentiate between different types of government. I should also mention that theocracy is going to go more towards the top, but again, it could go either way on the economic scale. And depending on how strict the religion is, it might not be all the way towards the top on the social scale. The political compass is not the only spectrum that takes multiple things into account when looking at ideology. There's other spectrums like these two that are talking about freedom and tradition, or a cultural focus and an economic focus. So the political spectrum is just a tool that we can use to see that there's more out there than just a two-pronged left, right, conservative, liberal kind of thing. But that's still how the United States works, and that's what we're going to be talking about in the next podcast. Thanks for listening.